Welcome friends, colleagues, and family of Bruce Mainwaring to the Episcopal Academy. It should not escape anyone why we would hold the celebration of Bruce's life here in this sacred space, the class of 1944 chapel. Bruce was instrumental in its coming to life. In addition, Bruce as a student here was a choir scholar, sharing his gift with the EA community. Therefore, we will celebrate and honor Bruce's life here in this sacred space through the telling of stories and the singing of sacred hymns. At this time, I invite you into a spirit of prayer and reflection. Let us pray. O God, whose name is most holy, we thank you for your servant Bruce and for the positive impact he had on our broken world. May we glorify your holy name as we honor Bruce's life and legacy. May we remember him as an artist and a philanthropist who gave his talents and treasures to make the world a better place for all people. May we remember him as a family man and a lover of his neighbor. Finally, may we remember him so we can follow his example of generosity, kindness, and integrity. We lift this prayer in Jesus' most holy name, and together we say, Amen. At this time, I would like to call forward Quinn Pollard of the Philadelphia Boys Choir.
My name is Jim Squire, and I'm the former chaplain here at EA for 38 years, so I knew Bruce and Peggy very well. Today we're here to celebrate his life, but we stand in a unique space this morning, built by the gifts of the class of 1944, including Robert Venturi, his partner and spouse, Denise Scott Brown, and the focus this day on another artist of the class, Bruce Mainwaring. Bruce was an artist, and it is that aspect of his life that we celebrate today. It was Bach who stated that the great paradox of life is my life has always imitated art, and my art has always imitated my life. We live in a world not of either or, but of both and. That statement captures the heartbeat of Bruce, whose very life itself merged the world of art and the world of living. The EA yearbook over the years has always been a challenge for someone to write about a student on their page in such a way that it would capture a classmate's essence, their soul. They were successful in capturing the spirit of Bruce. His yearbook quotation reads, "Bruce was one of the most musically talented students of our class and would be heard singing almost everywhere he went." Hold that image in your mind today. Everywhere he went, music. Bruce's life was art. That is our theme. Just consider places that were near and dear to Peggy and Bruce that they supported. He had a connection to the art world. He began early, winning a competition to join the St. James Boy Choir. Sang in the Glee Club here at EA, and was editor of the literary magazine. At Penn, he was called a Renaissance man, being a member of Mask and Wig, and later his many contributions to Penn University Museum, constantly leading that institution forward in the study of collections and what progress should look like 10 years from now. He loved the orchestra, and he loved opera. His life's work as CEO of 3 manufacturing industries enabled him to find a place for his leadership, his innovation, his thinking, and developing special steel tubing and cables of the highest quality. Susan reminded me that they were only, or at least than a 1/16 of an inch thick. What businesses need that kind of cable? I asked that of Bruce one day, and in his humble way, he responded, "They're for spaceships that will go deep into the frontier of space, but also deep into everything at the bottom of the sea and everything in between." His childhood wonder and curiosity directed his quest always for new frontiers. Bruce's life was art. His soul was special to all who loved him and those he loved back, and who became his friends in this expanding world of friendship and associates. His soul can be found in his smile and understated glee when you looked into his eyes, and there you would inevitably see that he viewed the world around him with gratitude. One of the great secrets of life was known to Bruce. It was the metaphorical brush that made big strokes of painting on those canvases that supported his commitment to learn and to help others to grow. The secret is not so much a secret. It is, you only get to keep what you're willing to give away. He was an artist of the voice, the dance, the drama, and other artists joining him in his search for new frontiers. He edited a book of essays about climate change, which examined how selected cultures responded to climate events. He and his colleagues, addressed that whole issue of threats to our island home, even if it was through his tubing, looking for new frontiers, looking for new possibilities. Bruce's life was his art. It is a perspective and vision that empowers us to stand a little taller, feel a little bit more included, and a sense, each and every one of us, that we are valued. I saw this most clearly in the lives of Bruce and Peggy. When you were in conversation with either Bruce or Peggy, they possessed the ability to have others feel that you were their great friend. They did this by totally being focused on the person, on me, on you, as few can do, as few can be. We call it holy hospitality. We could say that we are better people just knowing them. They were people of grace and style, something that's gotten lost in the noise and rudeness of our present culture. Those two were the very best of old school. Bruce's life was his art. Our school community is filled with gratitude for the abundance of support for building this, the class of 1944 chapel. We see in this structure a clear picture of the characteristics of Bruce as an artist. The gospel words of St. Matthew were lived each day of the planning and execution of this structure by Bob Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. And it was really my privilege to play a small part in working with them. A city built upon a hill cannot be hid. It gives light to all from this house. In the same way, let your light shine before for others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. 3 things make for great architecture as determined by Denise Scott Brown. One day, I asked Denise how her new book of photography of architecture was doing, as the photographs were on exhibit all around the world. She, for those of you who know her, is a quick wit with a twinkle in her eye. She added, "Jim, the one I really like is in Venice," and then said, "I'm not talking about Venice, California." She captured the essence of what every building should have. It should first have commodity, which refers to how useful a building is. Does it serve its purpose? Then firmness. Will it hold up under use, which is accomplished by using excellence in materials? That floor is state-of-the-art, where Peggy and others are seated in the front rows. Notice they're built for little children. As many know, the class of 1944 chapel was to be a light to the world. The American Institute of Architects gave it its highest award, a gold medal. The New York Times listed it in an article that it was one of 8 structures in America, and I love this, that were just too cool for a school. How do these elements of great architecture reflect the characteristics, the personality of Bruce? Commodity. The first element is that she and Bob wanted the chapel used as frequently as the one before. And they wanted a structure and seating that was built for students, hence those first pews. It is one of the most used religious structures in the Philadelphia area. One word to describe Bruce's life as art is that he created and supported projects that were well used and that were useful, not just locally, but to the entire world. Recall that yearbook quote, that Bruce was always singing anywhere that he was on the EA campus. There's a musical experience in the spring that brings all the Interact schools together for a night of song. Historically, the group rotates from one school to another. After the group sung for the first time here, I had the directors of music of each school approach me and requested that they come to sing all their programs in this venue because the sound was so magnificent. I don't know if they're still doing that. Firmness. The use of the best materials should be used to support worthy endeavors. Given Bruce's propensity for hearing and singing music, we made sure that sounds within these walls were balanced with an acoustic specialist team. The quality of the materials that Bruce used in his manufacturing plants was a call for us to use the best in construction of this building itself. It should be such that you don't have to put up a sign, handle with care, because our students respect the chapel space and the whole history of our school. Finally, light. Light is the third essential ingredient for a church structure. The building must treat light with sensitivity because the symbol of light equals love in the schema of this sacred space. There was great interest in the windows. You are the light of the world. That is what we are commanded to be. When we enter this sacred space, we remember that we must act in accordance with Jesus' words to live the ethical life and to take that force out into the world. Jesus' words move throughout this chapel and touch all that enter here with the importance of responding to the needs of others and the awesome responsibility to do so. If these walls could talk, they would speak of the sacred text of the story, that everything that is noble and true should be done here and taken out to there. The keys to architect's greatness: commodity, usefulness, firmness. These words describe our friend, our family member, classmate, and benefactor. A. Bruce Mainwaring. Because his life is his art. Bach saw life in the sound of caring immense together with one and another, and shines the light on our students to look for inspiration and to kindle their own spirit of gratitude, of generosity, and giving to others, like in the life of Bruce Mainwaring, who could be found singing as he made his way through our school. It was no secret that his classmates and many others noticed this because Bruce's life was art itself. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Gould. I was asked here today to celebrate Bruce Mainwaring's profound contributions to the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, for which I serve as chair of its board of advisors. But I also want to speak to you today as someone who regarded Bruce as a friend, and a valued colleague, and, ironically, as a competitor. For the years we served together on the museum board, the last few of the 39 plus years he served the university, we enjoyed lots of thoughtful, productive, creative conversations about the museum, about archaeology, about the things that he was passionate about in the building. But we also had a lot of fun around the fact that his company, Uniform Tubes, is the arch competitor to Superior Tube Company, whose board I chaired for almost a dozen years. And we enjoyed the fact that we were friends, colleagues, and happy competitors in a market. But as we just heard, Specialty 2 business is an interesting business. We send things to the moon. We put things into your body. We do things that nobody else can do with things that are so small you can put human hairs in them and even put them in human hairs. So I understand, perhaps better than most at Penn and many others I suspect who worked with him in other fields, what it took for Bruce to achieve the business success that he recorded as he grew UTI to prominence, the success that both created the resources and the knowledge and the wisdom that he brought to the University of Pennsylvania, and particularly to the Penn Museum. Bruce served on the museum's board, according to the official files, for 39 years, 3 months, and 13 days. It's an extraordinary record. He chaired the museum's board from 1991 to 1996. Together with his wife Peggy, and Peggy and Bruce are a couple deeply in the hearts of the Penn Museum, they both provided the care and the support that literally has impacted the museum from one end to the other, east to west. Bruce served as the chair of the campaign, served with Peggy as the lead donor, and himself and they themselves energized dozens of supporters to create the museum's East Wing, now known as the Mainwaring Wing, that houses offices, classrooms, and approximately 60,000 of the most delicate objects in the Penn Museum's collection. Later in 2010, when the museum had an opportunity to bring long-awaited air conditioning to its 1899 West Wing, known in the museum as the Big Dig, he and Peggy stepped up once again. As the lead donors, that wing now houses the Center for Analysis of Archaeological Materials, opened in 2014, world-class archaeological spaces and technical capacity equaled by no one else in the world. Here, hundreds of undergraduate and graduate students learn by doing, study the disciplines of archaeological science that Bruce championed for decades. Along the way, Bruce and Peggy endowed several positions and funded countless programs, including the Mainwaring teaching specialist for zooarchaeology, occupied by his friend Kate Moore. Bruce also was the Penn Museum's consummate ambassador. He brought groups on tours to the excavation sites where the researchers worked. He brought them to dinners in its galleries, and he brought them to stimulating programs on thought-provoking topics. Often he was well ahead of his time. For example, in 2008, he hosted an interdisciplinary look at climate crises in human history, trying to understand what present-day people might learn from the strategies that humans used in the past to adapt to climate change. The world is still catching up with Bruce. Bruce was not just a source of wisdom at board meetings. His dry humor routinely leavened the proceedings. One former colleague on the board, Joe Lundy, remarked at another meeting last week that, quote, no pun was left unturned when Bruce was in the room. I myself particularly recall, and I would say I regularly quote in nonprofit contexts, his interjection one afternoon while staff were attempting to introduce one of Penn's perpetual capital campaigns, that, quote, the shortest measurable unit of time is the gap between the end of one capital campaign and the start of the next. But the museum was not the only place Bruce and Peggy left their marks. He served the university as a trustee and on many university-wide committees, including as a director of the General Alumni Society, the Agenda for Excellence Council, Bread Upon the Water Scholarship Fund, and many others, including Mask and Wig, whom you'll hear from shortly. For good reason, the university bestowed its Alumni Award of Merit on Bruce in 1987. Now, others here can no doubt highlight Bruce's many civic contributions beyond Penn better than I, or shed more light on his business accomplishments than my time allots. But I'd like to close by saying that there are few in Philadelphia, or indeed few in many other regions, who can even aspire to match the essential role Bruce Mainwaring played in Philadelphia's business evolution, its educational institutions, and its civic life. He will be sorely missed.
Good morning. The Masquerade Club is deeply, deeply honored that the Mainwaring family has invited the club to participate today in this magnificent celebration of Bruce's life. My name is Sheldon Pugelmas. I'm a past president of the club, and it's my honor today to represent Masquerade. Before I sort of move into my prepared remarks, I'm just struck by the realization that when you get to know somebody through one particular sphere of activity, and you learn about their characteristics and you see them in action, it is always so striking how when you hear from people who interacted with somebody in a different sphere, how many of the same themes come across. The dignity, the puns. It's just so, it's amazing how the salient characteristics of somebody really come across in all of the spaces in which they travel. And I'm just so struck by that this morning. So for nearly 135 years, the Masquerade Club at the University of Pennsylvania has created and presented original musical comedy productions. And we think that Masquerade is a bit unusual, even unique perhaps, among performing arts groups, certainly performing arts groups at the university, in that while our productions are presented by undergraduates, the club itself has a membership of around 400 alumni. And the alumni of the club, especially as we get older, we recognize that the bonds that we form across the eras of the club are so magnificent. This youthful connection of something fun that you do becomes a connection for life. The 20-year-old comes to understand that the 80-year-old or the 90-year-old had their special moments on stage as well. That's the magic of Masquerade. And when I was one of those undergraduates in 1984-1985 season, I was a member of the club's Board of Governors. Our board consists of alumni and undergraduates. And as one of those undergraduate board members, I served under club president Bruce Mainwaring. And that's how I got to know Bruce nearly 40 years ago. And as I prepared for today, it actually occurred to me that at the time, Bruce was in his 50s, probably just a little past his 35th reunion year. So now with my own 35th reunion really fading in the rear view, I just can't help reflect on just how young Bruce was when he was president of the club. Either that or maybe my own perspective on these things has shifted. Masquerade has always been guided by a simple phrase that was written on our original casting call in 1888. Justice to the stage, credit to the university. And without a doubt, Bruce Mainwaring exemplified that ideal every day. In the long history of the club, there have been but a few special individuals whose contributions have fundamentally defined the club's path. To put it quite simply, the Masquerade Club would have long ago ceased to exist without the steadfast leadership and unwavering financial support that Bruce provided to the club for many, many decades. In the 1980s and 90s, around my undergraduate and early alumni years, Bruce was a stabilizing force and really brought true strategic focus to the club's operations and its finances. And we struggled through the early 90s. And at one point, the club had to face the difficult decision of how to move forward, if to move forward, what to do. And we reached the very difficult decision at that time to sell our original Maxfield Parish mural. It was actually Parish's first commission. So his mural of Old King Cole that had hung at the clubhouse for nearly 100 years. But in those difficult meetings, which I recall quite well, because by that point I was the board secretary, and these meetings went on for hours. But it was Bruce who reminded everybody with his characteristic wit, "Gentlemen, it's parish or perish." And I know that he loved that one, and he repeated it often, but it was a classic. Fast forward a bit, as we began to find our footing and move forward and look for new and bigger frontiers as we rebounded in our renaissance. In the mid-2000s, the club embarked on a major renovation of the clubhouse. The building was built in 1834, and we'd been in there since 1894. It needed a little work. And as we planned that, and the plans were laid out, Bruce made an unprecedented singular contribution that enabled the project to move forward as planned. And he continued to offer his support, and more importantly, well, maybe not more importantly, but just as importantly, his guidance. As projects often do, struggled along, as we had a fire in the building a few weeks before we were supposed to move back in. And then later, as we recovered from the fire and we had, shall we say, difficulties with our contractor. And through it all, Bruce was always there. I remember so many of those times where he just was a calm voice and just kept us moving forward. But he was more than just a thoughtful leader, as so many people have said, and a generous contributor. He was so deeply engaged. He was so eager to connect with members of all ages, a freshman, an alumnus, didn't matter. He would engage you with that penetrating question. I think somebody who said, where you felt that you were the only person in the room. It was a gift. I saw this over and over in all the years that we sat together at the Maskenwig board table. He was so deeply admired and respected, and man, what a head of hair. So jealous. But during the darkest period of the renovation, I had the luck to be serving as the president of the club, having moved from the Capitol campaign into the presidency. We were making our way, I invited Bruce to join me one night to address our undergraduates before the final show of the spring of 2009, what we call Club Night, which is a private show for members of the club. Now, this was our second year in exile. We had been out of the clubhouse for 2 shows in a row. The show we were down the street at the Prince Theater. Our undergraduates have really been through the ringer for a couple of years of this exile. And I said, well, Bruce, come down and we're going to address them before the show goes up. And he was game. So he and I wended our way through the backstage hallways under the Prince Theater to a cramped dressing room, 40 undergraduates all crammed in. And he shared a few anecdotes, and he reminded them all how special Maskenwig was to all of us, even in those difficult circumstances. And the room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. It was really an incredible, incredible moment. And as I said, through the years, this was an example of how club members, how Maskenwig club members are bound together by that common experience of bringing comedy and music to our audience. And we've heard so much about music today. And it's one of our great traditions at Maskenwig, particularly on Club Night or any time there's a gathering, for alumni to sing old favorite songs at the clubhouse. So one of the things we'd like to do today is honor Bruce's love of music and his love of Maskenwig by sharing 2 songs from the Maskenwig canon, songs that we know were particular favorites of his. I actually heard him sing both of these many times, and it's so interesting to note that even as a young student here, he was singing all the time. He was always singing, and I've heard that from the family. He was always singing. And so, as I said, I had an opportunity to hear him do these songs a number of times. The first of this is actually a recording of Bruce singing the song "Stars Over the Schoolhouse." Hopefully that's queued up somewhere. Well, I do know about this song that the family shared with me that Bruce used to actually sing "Stars Over the Schoolhouse" quite often, and maybe it was particularly meaningful for him because he and Peggy had met in a large schoolhouse called the University of Pennsylvania, and I do recall, in particular, that Bruce sang this song at the gala that we had to celebrate the completion of the renovation project. Since I was, I think I had just completed, no, I was still president at the time, and so I was privileged to have the Mainwaring sitting with me at the table that night, and I didn't watch Bruce sing. I watched Peggy while Bruce sang. And that was marvelous to watch the love as he sang. That was a special moment for me. I'm hoping we have the recording. If not, well, I guess that is going to be our first glitch of the day. So we do have a second song that is called "Not So Long Ago." And this actually happens to be one of my personal favorites. It's actually perhaps one of Maskenwig's best-known songs. It was covered by Frank Sinatra, among other people. Although I'll take Bruce's version any day. To lead us with that, to bring us that song, I'd like to introduce two of my fellow members of the club, our soloist Kyle Kozloff and our pianist accompanist Neil Radish. Gentlemen.
I suppose you could also refer to it as Plan B. It's wonderful to have a piano here because, as Sheldon said, in a somewhat different type of sacred space, coming down to the drill room in the clubhouse and spending time embarrassing ourselves and each other in front of the piano. That even as someone who graduated nearly 50 years or 40 years after Bruce did, that we were able to share time together in doing that. So I'm thrilled to be able to sing one of his songs for you. Last night you were there. I know you were right to see. Yes,
Finally, Kyle, why don't you can stay. We'd like to honor Bruce by offering the Masculine Club's traditional toast. And I'd like to ask all of the club members to join us by the piano.
I'm going to ask, as we say, the age-old musical question. Why is there only one Bruce Mainwaring?
Because there's only room for one. There's only room for one. So here's a swig and a toast so big, straight from the hearts of Mask and Wig. There's only room for one. There's only room for one. We drink to you with a toast for two, but there's only room for one. Hey!
Great job.
As the Reverend Squire pointed out, my father was an artist, and one of the arts that he practiced was the art of fly fishing. He took the practice up by getting lessons in the 1970s, became quite adept at fishing. He introduced me to the sport in the 1980s. In the mid-90s, he invited me to go with him and his business partner, Gordon Hattersley, for a week-long fishing trip in Alaska. And at the time, I remarked to my wife, Susan, that that week would be the longest I had spent with my dad in about 20 years. Back to the time when we used to take family vacations exploring the American West. And after that first trip, we began making similar trips to Alaska about every other year up until he was 80 years old. And as we made those trips, more and more of his friends in his fishing club, from Mask and Wig, and business associates would join us at a lodge in Alaska until we were pretty much filling the entire facility. These were really joyous occasions, spending a week out in the wilds, fishing, and sharing dinner together in the evening. And at that time, my father would often stand up and start singing. When my son was about 11, my father came out to Montana, where I live, and arranged for him to get fishing lessons. And he became pretty good at it. And when he was 12, he made his first trip with us to Alaska. And one of my greatest memories of fishing with my dad was my son Dalton's first cast into a stream in Alaska, where he hooked up with a good-sized trout that went racing off downstream, jumping out of the water. And as my son fought that fish he looked up with his big grin on his face and said, "It's all true." I was in Alaska recently. In fact, I got back home the day before Dad died. And while I was up there, I kept thinking of him because I knew he was ailing, and the scenery reminded me very much of those wonderful trips we made in the past. I talked to Dad on the phone and described that trip to him with the help of my sister Susan on the morning of his death. Then when Susan called me a day or so later to talk about this service, she asked me if I'd like to speak, and I said, yes, I would. And I'd like to address two of Dad's very prominent traits. One, his competitiveness, and the other, his forthright honesty. When I mentioned competitiveness, Sister Susan interrupted me and said, "You know, our dad could never throw a game of Monopoly just so his kids could win once in a while." And I didn't tell her that my description of his honesty would involve a fishing story. And I know that honesty and fish stories usually don't go hand in hand, but I think they do in this case. It goes back to one of our Alaska trips when he and I were floating a river with a guide. He in the front of the boat, the guide in the middle manning the oars, and I fishing from the rear. And this was on a river called the Kwijak, which drains Alaska's largest lake. If you're familiar with Alaska, that is Lake Iliamna. This is a very fast-flowing stream. It winds around, and at this particular time of year that we were fishing, these very, very large rainbow trout were dropping down out of the lake to spawn and defended their eggs so that we could entice them to hit our flies by choosing flies that imitated creatures that would be stealing the eggs. And as we started fishing, it wasn't really up to Alaska standards. We were only catching fish on every fourth or fifth cast. But as the morning wore on, we got better. We recognized where the fish were, what flies they were going to hit, and we started catching large fish. At one point, my father asked the guide if he would measure a particularly large trout. And that involved having to beach the boat so that the guide had his hands free for measuring the fish. And that done, Dad said, "I think that's probably the biggest trout I've ever caught in my life." So we proceeded on downstream, and Dad caught a slightly larger fish, which he asked to have measured. So we had to beach the boat, and this happened really over the course of the next 2 hours or so, probably 3 or 4 more times. And I was getting a little frustrated because I was missing opportunities to fish as we went off searching for a place to put the boat ashore and measure the fish. And I asked Dad, I said, "Dad, why do you have to measure these fish?" And he said, "Well, these are the biggest fish I've ever caught in my life, And when I tell people that I've caught the biggest fish of my life, they're going to want to know exactly how big it was, and I want to have a measurement. And I think that was indicative not only of his competitiveness. He really wasn't competing with anyone else. He was competing with himself. But his honesty demanded that he be perfectly accurate. Thank you for coming this morning.
Good morning. Is this all right? Yes. Before I move into my remarks about Dad, I'd just like to acknowledge that my mother, our mother, Margaret Elizabeth Redfield Mainwaring, is right here. That in itself is a bit of a miracle. Mom and Dad were married for 74 years. And I will not disclose my mother's age, but it is remarkable. So thank you, Mom. When I was writing my father's obituary, I learned a few things. The first thing I learned was that he didn't have a CV. I vaguely remembered that there were some family papers in my attic where I found a long cardboard tube I recognized as being important. Bruce M. Lifeline was printed on the outside. Inside were 3 rolled poster-sized images of neatly printed block letters. Each was divided into 5 columns. From left to right, they read year, age, personal, family, business. I'd hit the jackpot. On page 1 were key dates and events in Dad's childhood. His birth in February 1927, the tragic death of his mother when he was only 6, the move to live in his grandmother's narrow Roxborough row house with his father, bachelor uncle, aunt, 2 sisters, and 1 cousin. The children all under 8 years of age. There was his life-changing choir scholarship to Episcopal 4 years later, highlighted in hot pink, and the start of his weekend and summer work on a drawbench when he was 13, the 3rd man in his father's tiny business called Uniform Tubes. In 1944, Bruce entered the University of Pennsylvania in a naval uniform, a reserve officer in the V-12 program, which allowed him to enlist when he was only 17. Met Peggy in math class is featured in hot pink and dated September 1945. Started dating Peggy doesn't appear until February of the following year. That was about the longest stretch of dilly-dallying for the rest of Dad's life. From this first poster page, I learned that Mom and Dad were engaged at Christmas 1946, a new fact. Our parents were married the following year, and then the family column populates fairly quickly with 3 births. All of this was pretty interesting reading. My siblings and I were now on the chart, each of us in hot pink. It took me a while to see that the upsetting or negative events in my father's life were underlined in blue. A long and serious illness, a business setback. But overall, the pinks far outnumbered the blues. This morning, colleagues, friends, and fans of Bruce Mainwaring have talked about his accomplishments and their memories of him. Certainly his was a productive life, full of generosity, creativity, and fun. Little of his good fortune was accidental. He was fond of saying, "You make your own luck." In scrolling down the Bruce M. timeline, there's a change in 2000, when Dad was 73. The listing of events turned into plans. Among the plans were play more bridge, do more fly fishing, travel while still able to do so. All of these he enjoyed into his late 70s. He and my mother traveled the world while focusing on supporting institutions at home. A series of dots drops down the page after 2000. Under the age column, 90 appears with a big question mark. Would he reach 90? The columns to the right are blank. In the Mainwaring family, there runs a thread of love. A love of music and of words, which can make music of their own. This affection is invaluable to the reader and the writer, the listener and the musician, the poet and the punster. Bruce Mainwaring's puns, as we have heard, were legendary. We knew from a certain smile that lit up his face and eyes that a pun was brewing and about ready to make its debut. As Bruce moved deeper into his 90s, his loss of hearing dampened the world of sound. His astonishing memory for facts and numbers softened too. He recognized that, and rather than fight old age, he relaxed. Dad was hanging out in the day-to-day. His innate kindness and cheerful disposition were still there. He accepted help easily and politely, eternally the gentleman. His concern was always for your mother. About a month before Dad died, I was visiting him at beautiful Beaumont at Bryn Mawr, where he and Mom had moved in 1998, the year of their 50th wedding anniversary. I'd noticed a slim tank hanging on the back of his wheelchair. Dad's breath was shallow and rapid. He was gasping and could barely talk. I called for a nurse who walked over to his chair and said, "We're going to give you some oxygen, Mr. Mainwaring. Is that okay?" In the faintest breeze of a voice, Dad squeezed out, "O2." Arguably his last pun. In time, everyone in this beautiful chapel, so full of light and air on this magnificent day, will exhale a final breath. Given my father's example, that could be okay. It was so easy, so peaceful. I was holding his hand on September 6th and said to him that he could let go, that we would take good care of Mom. He left a second later. A Bruce Mainwaring is now somewhere flying with what might be the biggest question of all. What comes after this life? Wherever his spirit is, I would bet good money there's a plan forming, accompanied by the most magnificent music. Perhaps he's more immersed than ever in the enigma that always fascinated him. How does the universe work? In this picture, Panis Angelicus is always on the table. Thank you all for coming.
Before I offer the final blessing, I would like to invite the guests today down to the reception that is in the Conley Courtyard. If you leave chapel and go off to your right down the green, that will be on your right-hand side by the Crawford Center. At this time, I invite you to stand as you are able. May you be radiant in your faith, spontaneous in your joy, and rich in your service to others. And may the blessing of Almighty God, who creates, who redeems, and who inspires, be with you today and forever. And together we say, Amen. At this time, we are going to be singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.